The bride he never expected walked off that stagecoach, and nothing would ever be the same. Before we start the video, comment your country so we know how far this story has traveled. The morning sun pushed through the worn curtains of the Whitfield farmhouse as Clara Whitfield pressed her forehead against the cool window. Dust devils twisted across the Nebraska fields, the same field she'd worked since she could walk. 24 years old and already weathered by work, she'd accepted her place as a plain one long ago. But the shouting from downstairs shattered her quiet. Clara walked into the kitchen to find her father, Robert Whitfield, thunder-faced, her mother pale and tight-lipped, and her younger sister Lillian crying prettily into a lace handkerchief. Lillian, golden-haired, porcelain-skinned, admired by every man in town. Even in distress she looked staged for a painting. "Tell her," Robert ordered. Lillian lifted tear-filled eyes. "I can't marry him. Clara, I simply can't. A rancher in Wyoming? Living in some wilderness shack? I'd rather die." Clara's stomach dropped. For 6 months, Lillian had been writing to a rancher named Caleb Remington, answering his ad for a mail-order bride. He'd even sent money for her travel west. "You gave your word," their mother whispered. Lillian sniffed. "I was confused. Besides, Charles Mercer has been calling on me. He owns a general store. I belong here, not in some frontier hut." Robert slammed the table. "You took that man's money. You made a promise." Then Lillian said the words that would change Clara's life forever. "Then let Clara go in my place." The silence hit like a slap. Clara felt every gaze land on her. The plain sister, the practical one, the one no man in town chose. Lillian's voice dripped sugar. "Caleb's never seen me. Only that one blurry photograph. Clara could take my place. She fits that life." Clara whispered, "That's dishonest." Her father's voice cut cold. "You'll go. You'll tell him the truth when you arrive. He'll decide, but you will honor this family's commitment." 2 days later, Clara stood at the stagecoach station, her small trunk at her feet, her future uncertain. And somewhere in the Wyoming mountains, Caleb Remington waited for a bride who no longer existed. The coach jolted and rolled for days, towns blurring into prairie, prairie into rock. Clara Whitfield learned the cadence of travel, the clack of wheels, the groan of leather, the ache in the back that never quite settled. Reverend Palmer offered news in a steady voice. A heavy-set woman named Mrs. Crettick complained about dust and rations. They called Clara brave or desperate for answering another woman's promise. She thought, maybe both. She kept the letters close, the ones Caleb Remington had written to Lillian. His script was careful, shaped with earnestness. He wrote of 200 acres, of mountains that cut the sky, of loneliness stitched into everyday tasks. He wanted someone strong enough for the ranch, but gentle enough to make a house a home. Clara touched the paper until it warmed to her fingertips. At a small station, they changed horses. A man in a good black hat waited among a cluster of ranchers and merchants. Clara's heart picked out a rhythm, taller than most, dark hair, good hat, as Caleb had described. She stepped down, and the wind tried to steal her bonnet, prairie breath testing her resolve. He looked twice. Gray eyes, sharp as winter. Tall, broad-shouldered, hands that had built fences and held rifles. Caleb Remington's gaze slid over Clara with something like calculation, then confusion. This is not Lillian, he realized, but the moment she said her name, Clara pushed forward and told the truth. "I am Clara Whitfield. My sister changed her mind. She sent me." Silence hung like a pause in a song. Caleb's jaw tightened. His flat response could have sent her back on the next coach. But instead he did something unexpected. He offered a ride to the ranch that night. Practical, unromantic, spare of words. He would decide in the morning. Curiosity trigger. What did Caleb see in Clara that kept him from sending her away? Watch how one small reveal in his packed trunk changes everything. They rode into dusk, the town's yawns and saloons left behind. The wagon's lantern threw long shadows. Clara watched Caleb work, hand steady, movements efficient. He dumped her trunk on the porch and showed her spare room. No theatrics, no promises. Just a stove, a bowl of stew, and a man who expected work and honesty. That night Clara lay awake listening to the house settle, to coyotes call. She felt raw and exposed, an honest thing in a world that had tried to package her. Tomorrow the ranch would decide if she belonged here. Tomorrow would ask her to be more than a substitute. Morning cracked open cold and blew over Caleb Remington's land. Clara woke to a rooster's cry, stiff from travel, nerves tight as thread. She smoothed her second-best dress, pinned her hair with a steadiness she didn't quite feel, and stepped into a kitchen arranged like a soldier lived there, functional, neat, and unloved. Without thinking, she started cooking. By the time Caleb entered, stamping dust from his boots, the table was laid with biscuits, crisp bacon, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. He stopped in the doorway, really stopped, as if he wasn't used to warmth greeting him in the morning. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I'm used to being useful," Clara answered. "Sit." He did, and he watched her, not like men looked at Lillian, hungry for beauty, but like a man measuring truth. The longer he looked, the more something in his gray eyes shifted. Not softer, but more awake. After breakfast he spoke plainly. "I need a partner, not an ornament. Someone who won't break when winter hits. Are you that kind?" "I've lived my whole life unseen next to a prettier sister," Clara said. "I know hard seasons. I don't scare easy." He studied her, jaw tight. Then he said, "Come with me." Outside, the ranch opened in every direction, barns and corrals stretching toward distant peaks. Chickens scratched in the dirt. Cattle moved slow and heavy. The mountains rose like giants watching over the land. Caleb moved through it all with a quiet authority, a man shaped by loss and grit more than words. 200 acres, he said, built by these hands after the war. He flexed his scarred fingers without thinking. "It isn't a fancy life." "It's real," Clara said. Before he could answer, a young rider appeared. Eli Dawson, sandy-haired and carrying an easy grin. He tipped his hat at Clara with open admiration. "Welcome to Wyoming. Caleb here's a lucky man." Caleb's expression flickered with something sharp he didn't voice. Clara watched the two men ride off to fix a broken fence. Alone on the ranch, she rolled up her sleeves, opened windows, swept out months of bachelor dust, and brought life back into the quiet rooms. She found Caleb's bedroom, spare and rigid, everything arranged with military precision. In a trunk lay his folded Union uniform and letters tied neatly with string, all addressed to Sergeant Caleb Remington. She didn't read them. Some things had to be given, not taken. By sundown she had revived the kitchen, planned supper, salvaged what she could from the garden, and earned a respect Caleb didn't yet know he felt. At dusk, Clara stood at the garden fence as the sun melted into gold behind the mountains. Two riders approached, one looking at her with curiosity, and the other with something far more dangerous. Clara was in the yard when Caleb and Eli returned near sunset. Both men dusted from the trail. Caleb found her hauling water to the tomato plants that still fought to live in the thin Wyoming soil. Without a word, he stepped in beside her and took the bucket from her hands. They worked together in quiet rhythm, the kind that forms naturally between people who notice the same details. Inside, Clara finished supper while Eli told stories, cheerful and steady like a man who didn't yet know hardship. He complimented her cooking, her garden ideas, even the simple jar of wildflowers she placed on the table. Caleb grew quieter with every one of those compliments. When Eli finally rode home, Caleb washed dishes beside Clara. The silence was heavier than the night outside. He dried a plate, paused, and said, "He'd caught you proper. The boy sees you." Clara's breath caught. "Are you sending me back?" Caleb set the plate down. His face was unreadable in the lamplight. "I haven't decided anything, but I know this house feels different with you in it. It feels settled." Something in his voice reached her. Not soft, not romantic, but honest. The next 2 weeks settled into a pattern. Clara rising early to cook and tend the home, Caleb working the land until dusk, both circling each other with a strange, careful awareness. No promises, no decisions, but something living between them. Everything changed the day Clara found the letters. The drawer in the small parlor desk stuck, and when she tugged it open, papers spilled across the floor. Letters. Caleb's handwriting. Drafts he'd never sent. Not the polished ones written for Lillian, but raw, struggling thoughts about loneliness, warm memories, and the quiet ache of a man who kept more inside than he ever spoke aloud. Clara read only a few lines before guilt pricked her, but she couldn't escape the truth in them. He wasn't just a hard man. He was a wounded one. Clara. She jumped, scattering the papers. Caleb stood in the doorway, face unreadable. She expected anger, but he only stared at the letters in his hands as if seeing ghosts rise from the page. I wrote these before I learned how to hide things better, he said quietly. I didn't mean for anyone to read them. They are honest, Clara whispered. They sound like the real you. Caleb looked at her then, really looked, the room holding its breath between them. There was more in his eyes and confusion this time. Something was shifting, whether he wanted it to or not. Caleb told Clara to saddle up. She followed him outside, unsure why, but he handed her shawl and mounted his horse without explanation. She climbed onto her mare and rode beside him through pines and rising hills until the ranch disappeared behind them. They reached a high ridge just as the sun dropped behind the mountains. The whole valley glowed gold and red like the land itself was on fire. Clara drew a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Caleb watched her out of the corner of his eye, not the view. This is where I come when life gets too heavy, he said. During the war, I held on to the memory of this place. It kept me sane. Clara understood him in a way she didn't expect. It's beautiful. Beautiful and terrible, Caleb said. Like most things worth having. He paused, then added something she didn't see coming. Your sister would have hated it. She wrote about dresses and town gossip, not the sky changing colors or the sound of the land breathing. Clara turned toward him. How do you know I'm different? Caleb's voice roughened. Because I think I was writing to the wrong sister. The words hit her harder than any confession. The wind tugged at her hair, the horses shifted beneath them, and the world seemed to hold still. Caleb stepped closer. I'm not an easy man. I've got dark days, nights where memories don't stay buried. I don't talk much, and I don't know how to court anyone proper. I don't need courting, Clara said. Then what do you need? She didn't look away. Truth. Work that means something. A place where I'm not second to anyone. Caleb searched her face, the ridge quiet except for distant crickets. Could you make a life here? Not because your father sent you, but because you choose it. Clara felt it settle inside her like a final piece falling into place. I've been choosing it every day, she said softly. I'm here because it feels like where I'm meant to be. Caleb reached for her hand. His grip was warm, callous, certain. I can't promise easy, he said, but I can promise honest. They stood together as the last light faded, hand in hand, while the first stars rose over the valley that would shape both their lives. 3 days later, the storm rolled in without mercy. Thunder cracked over the valley like cannon fire, and Clara woke to the windows shaking and cattle crying in fear. She saw Caleb through the rain, already running toward the barn, coat snapping in the wind. She pulled on her boots and followed without hesitation. The yard was chaos. Rain hammered the ground so hard it bounced back as mist. Caleb shouted that a section of the east fence had come down and cattle were scattering. Eli had arrived early and was pointing toward the creek, his face pale. Clara didn't wait for permission. She mounted the nearest horse, soaked instantly, and followed Eli into the storm. Mud sucked at the hooves, lightning split the sky, and cattle moved like a frantic river of muscle. Together, she and Eli turned the herd, pushing them toward safer ground, fighting wind that nearly tore the reins from her hands. But her mind wasn't on the cattle. Caleb had gone alone toward the flooded creek. When the herd was secure, Clara spun her horse and raced toward him. The creek was unrecognizable, a churning brown monster swallowing everything in its path. Debris rushed past like broken bones. And in the middle of it, Caleb, waist deep, fighting to free a trapped calf pinned against a fallen log. Clara screamed his name, but the storm swallowed her voice. She slid down the muddy bank, ignoring Eli's shout behind her. The current nearly took her feet out from under her, but she grabbed onto a thick root and pushed deeper. Caleb saw her and his face twisted in fear and anger. He shouted for her to go back. She refused. The calf was bawling, frantic, and a fresh surge of water slammed into Caleb hard enough to drag him sideways. Clara lunged. Together they wrestled the calf free. The moment the log shifted, Caleb lost his footing and disappeared beneath the water. Clara grabbed blindly, fingers closing around his shirt just as Eli reached them and hauled all three toward safety. Caleb coughed up water on the muddy bank, soaked and shivering. Clara knelt beside him, gripping his face with trembling hands. He whispered, breathless, "You could have died." "So could you," she answered. They held each other for a long moment, rain pounding around them, the worst of the storm passing overhead. When they finally limped back to the house, dripping and exhausted, something had changed between them. Not spoken out loud, not declared, but real, something that felt dangerously close to love. The storm left the ranch looking wounded, fences torn, the garden half washed away, mud everywhere. But inside the house, Clara brewed coffee and stoked the fire while Caleb warmed himself beneath a blanket, steam rising from their clothes where they hung near the stove. When Eli left to check the far pastures, the house fell quiet. Caleb watched Clara move around the kitchen, her dress still damp, hair clinging to her face, hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. She didn't look away when he spoke. "I talked to the preacher," he said. "He can marry us this Saturday, if you still want that." Clara sat across from him. For a moment the only sound was a drip of rain from the roof. "I didn't go into that creek because I had to," she said. "I went because losing you terrified me more than the water." Caleb's eyes softened in a way she hadn't seen before. He took her hand, rough fingers intertwining with hers. "When I saw you coming down that bank, I knew what I wanted. I knew it was you." He said it simply, but it struck her deeper than any declaration. Saturday became a marker on the horizon, a place their footsteps were headed even as they repaired storm damage each day. The garden was ruined, but Clara planted new seeds anyway. The fences needed days of labor, but they mended them side by side without complaint. 2 mornings before the wedding, a buggy appeared on the horizon, a Polish carriage pulled by match bay horses, out of place on their dusty road. Clara recognized it instantly. Lillian. She stepped from the carriage in pale silk, untouched by dust or hardship, her smile bright and poisonous. "Clara," she said sweetly, "how rustic you look. And Mr. Remington, how wonderful to finally meet the man who wrote me such heartfelt letters." Clara felt her stomach twist. Lillian's presence dragged every old wound to the surface, the years of being overlooked, stepped over, dismissed with a smile. Inside the house, Lillian examined everything with amused superiority, then settled into a chair as if she owned the place. "I've been thinking," she began, smoothing her skirts. "It isn't too late for the original arrangement. I could stay. Clara could go home. It will be better for everyone." Caleb didn't flinch. He stepped behind Clara, his hand resting on her shoulder. "You misunderstand," he said. "I don't regret anything. I thank God you broke your word, because it brought me Clara." The words hung in the air like a final judgment. Lillian's smile cracked for the first time. Lillian rose from the chair with a sharp rustle of silk, her expression turning hard. Gone was the sweet tone, replaced by something colder. "You think she belongs here more than I do?" she asked Caleb. "I don't think it," he replied. "I know it." Clara stood still, feeling the weight of the moment. Lillian had always carried herself like someone the world should bend for. But here, in this simple kitchen built from hard seasons and honest labor, her shine looked thin. Fragile. Lillian's gaze swept the room again, this time with disdain. Dust everywhere. Cattle dying. A ranch falling apart. And this is what you choose. She looked directly at Clara. "When you're worn out and old before your time, remember I offered you a way back." Clara stepped forward. "I don't need a way back." Lillian blinked, surprised. For the first time, Clara's voice didn't tremble in her presence. "I'm home," Clara said, "and I'm staying." Lillian opened her mouth, but Caleb cut her off. "You wrote pretty words and painted pretty lies," he said. Clara brought truth. She brought steadiness. She brought life into this place. Lillian's jaw tightened. "So that's it? You choose her over me." Caleb didn't look away. Every time. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. Lillian broke it with a brittle laugh. "Well, enjoy your dusty little life." She turned toward the door. "And Clara, when I marry Charles Mercer this spring, I'll send an invitation, though I doubt you'll have proper clothes to attend." She swept out, the smell of perfume trailing behind her like a fading threat. The buggy wheels rolled away, shrinking down the long dirt road. Clara exhaled only when the sound finally disappeared. Caleb touched her arm gently. "You handled her better than I ever could." Clara's voice was quiet. "She can't hurt me the same way anymore." Caleb's hand stayed on her arm. "You know I meant what I said. You're my choice. Always." The truth settled in Clara's chest like warm light. For the first time in her life, she wasn't a shadow standing behind someone else. She wasn't the second option. She was the one he looked at, the one he trusted, the one he stood beside. That night, as they sat on the porch watching the sky turn to silver, Caleb reached for her hand without speaking. The land around them was still wounded from drought and storm, but somehow everything felt steadier, clearer. In 2 days, they would stand before a preacher, and nothing Lillian said could change what was already true between them. Saturday arrived with a quiet sky and a cool wind that carried the scent of sage across the valley. Clara stood in the small room, fastening the simple gray dress she and Martha Fletcher had altered. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with something deeper. Something that felt like stepping into a life she had finally chosen for herself. Martha clipped a delicate silver comb into Clara's hair. "There," she said. "Now you look exactly like the woman he's been waiting for, whether he knew it or not." When Clara stepped outside, Caleb was waiting by the wagon. Freshly shaved, dark hair brushed back, clean shirts off from many washings. He stared for a long moment, the kind of look that held gratitude, recognition, and a quiet or he didn't quite know how to express. "You're ready?" he asked. "I am," Clara said. The small church sat at the edge of town, wildflower placed in jars along the aisle. When Clara walked in, Caleb's expression shifted into something steady and certain, like his whole world had finally found a place to rest. They stood before Reverend Turner while Eli and Martha watched from the pews. The vows were simple, honest. 2 people choosing each other without pretense, without spectacle, without the fragile shine Lillian had always relied on. Only truth, only partnership. When the final word was spoken and Caleb took her hands, Clara felt the weight of every moment that led her here. The dusty coach ride, the storm, the letters, the doubts, the long years standing behind her sister. All of it had brought her to this point where she was no one's second choice. As they stepped out of the church into bright sunlight, Caleb leaned close. "You changed this place," he said. "You changed me. I'm grateful every day that it was you who walked off that coach." Clara took his arm. "I'm grateful it was your ranch I rode to." They rode home with the wind soft on their faces and the land stretching wide around them. The drought was still real, the work still hard, but the burden felt lighter now, carried between 2 pairs of hands instead of one. That evening they sat on the porch as the sunset turned the world gold. Caleb's arm rested around Clara's shoulders, her head against his chest, both of them watching the quiet sky. This was the life she chose, the life he chose. Harsh, honest, steady, and theirs. Nothing borrowed, nothing pretend. Exactly right. If this story reached you, share it with someone who loves slow-burning, hard-earned love, and tell us where in the world you watched it from.